2025 Northampton Public Schools budget. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. There is not a period of public comment for this special meeting. Laura, would you take the roll, please?
Sure. Councillor Dobbs.
Here.
Councillor Elkins.
Here.
Councillor Jarrett.
Here.
Councillor Clemmer.
Here.
Councillor Labarge.
Here.
Councillor, I believe we're not expecting Councillor Maori. Councillor Moulton.
Here.
Councillor Perry.
Here.
And Councillor Rothenberg.
Here.
Council President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So tonight we will first hear a presentation from Councillor Rothenberg and her panel for up to 30 minutes. Following that, the council and the mayor will have a discussion. No votes will be taken. During the discussion, if any councillor or the mayor has a question for the panel or a specific member of the panel, they may ask them directly. The panel will not have the floor otherwise. I need to disclose that I have a conflict of interest as a member of the Pedal People Cooperative, which has a pre-existing contract from before I was elected with the Central Services Parking Maintenance Department, which is part of the general fund budget. Councilor Rothenberg has indicated that she and the panel will not be discussing the Central Services Parking Maintenance budget. If there are any questions about or desire to discuss that specific budget area, please let me know. I will recuse myself and Councilor Elkins will preside. So Councilor Rothenberg, you have the floor.
Thank you, President Jarrett. I am very grateful for this opportunity as a representative of Ward 3 to make a presentation regarding alternative budget plans. I want to first take a moment and just sort of frame us in the context of municipal government to understand why a city councilor might be giving a presentation such as this. What we do in Northampton is we first elect a mayor. It's someone that we hope will carry out work in a way that reflects the values and priorities of our community, and that they'll be able to do that with an expert staff. But we also have another balance on that branch of government, which is our legislative branch. This is the city council. And the purpose of this is that the people of Northampton need to have a voice. So each one of us from the different wards represents the public. I represent Ward 3, which is Joe's Pizza, Bridge Street School, The Meadows, Paradise East. And when it comes time for budget season, the city council has to approve the mayor's budget, which is essentially to say that the people of Northampton have to approve the mayor's budget. It has to match our values and our priorities. It has to be fiscally responsible. This year, I have not been in a position where I've been able to accept or approve any of the proposed budgets on behalf of Ward 3. The main sticking point has been the school funding. Ward 3 as a whole, and the city more broadly, as far as I can tell from emails I've received and constituents I've spoken with from throughout the city, feels that school funding is a major priority for Northampton. This is a core value to our constituents. So tonight, I want to introduce you to some ideas and suggestions, a map forward for how we as a city could refine and improve and really smooth out our budgeting processes so that when we get to this point next year, we will be better positioned to be able to say as ward councilors that we wholeheartedly, on behalf of the people of Northampton, approve the mayor's budget. I have tried to learn from the DOR and from councilors from other cities and from constituents all throughout this city to put together ideas that meet many parameters that many diverse viewpoints would support. So I will walk you through those tonight. But first, I want to make sure that we take a moment to pause and really frame the problem that we're facing right now, which is the hidden cost of these cuts to our schools. So we will go through it just for a few minutes, first with Dr. Joanne Morgan, who is a first grade teacher at Bridge Street Elementary School. She can tell us more about what the impact of the proposed cuts will be in the classroom. Then we will turn to Miss Kate Fontaine, who is part of NACE leadership and teaches history at the high school. She can also give us a sense of perceptions for schools when we make these sorts of cuts. And then finally, I'll turn to a financial expert based on his many, many years in a city council in Connecticut, who is also deputy mayor, Al Simon. And he's going to walk us through what is really the crux of the conversation and the presentation tonight, which is that Northampton has a very interesting financial model from about 10 to 15 years ago that really was born out of wanting to increase our savings from a time when we were really struggling to stay in the green and we were in the red. And we have this model that's doing that very well, raising our savings. But unfortunately, a byproduct of it right now is that it's really been driving our schools into a more and more compromised position every year. And of course, as Northampton, the people of Northampton, we don't want that. We love our schools. So we really need to come up with, I think, a process that helps us balance a few more parameters, not just those reserve accounts, but also some other things. So we'll go through what that process might look like that could get us to a better budget. Without further ado, I will let Dr. Morgan take it away and tell us about what it looks like on the ground at the schools.
Thank you, Councilor Rothenberg. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what the proposed budget cuts would look like from a classroom perspective. I know many other educators have spoken eloquently about this topic over the past many months. I teach first grade at Bridge Street School. As was mentioned at a previous city council meeting, one way to differentiate instruction at the elementary level is to run a centers time in your classroom. I run both reading and math centers in my classroom every day, where students rotate between different activities over a period of 45 minutes to an hour in reading and again in math. It's my understanding that many teachers at the elementary level in Northampton have some sort of centers rotation in their classrooms. That's the time of day when I can meet with students in a small group at my teacher table to provide them with targeted instruction. While I'm meeting with students at my teacher table, the other students are doing independent work or meeting with another educator for direct instruction. Although I am the teacher who's generally in charge of what's going on at my center's time, I am by no means the only educator who is responsible for students' progress during those times of day. I want to be very clear about that. I work with a team of educators who support students in countless ways. I'll start with our first grade paraprofessionals. In a first grade classroom, a paraprofessional is invaluable. They help manage what's happening in the classroom throughout the day, and especially when I'm teaching a small group at my teacher table. They support the general running of the classroom, helping students stay on task, managing who's in the bathroom, getting Band-Aids, those kind of things. But when they're consistently in the classroom, the first grade paraprofessionals also provide instruction to students. That might come in the form of having a student read a book or passage aloud and providing corrective feedback. That might mean playing a learning game with a small group of students to help them practice a particular skill. Having a paraprofessional in the classroom means two important things. First, I don't need to disrupt my teaching to deal with the management issues that inevitably come up. And second, students get a lot more out of their work when there's an educator present who holds them holds them accountable for doing their work and provides them with instruction and feedback with whatever they are working on. At the same time, math and reading interventionists provide much needed academic support to students who are struggling to learn foundational skills. That is in addition to the instruction I provide to students in my classroom. For many students who are achieving below or well below grade level in math or reading, it is just not possible for the classroom teacher to provide them with enough instruction to make adequate progress, no matter how well the classroom is managed. In addition, because the special education referral and identification process can take so long in the early grades, these interventionists provide support to students who need more intensive special education support and who are waiting for those services to begin. I can tell you that with our current staffing levels, there continue to be students who are not adequately served because there are not enough interventionists at this time. I sat in multiple data team meetings this year where faculty had to debate which of the students who clearly needed additional support based on assessment data would actually receive that support, and which students would not receive it because there were not enough slots in the interventionist teaching schedules to meet the current level of need. I will say again, no matter how organized a teacher is, it is not possible for only the classroom teacher to support all students in making adequate progress in reading and math. I cannot imagine how I would be thinking about reaching all students in my classroom if I was also in a school that was dealing with large class sizes because of classroom teacher cuts. Everything that gets done in an elementary classroom in Northampton is made possible by the support of the tiered support specialists. These faculty are essential to the daily running of our schools. They support countless students in navigating difficult social situations, and they provide instructional support to students in classrooms. Their support in and out of the classroom helps students learn new skills, manage the important social connections in their lives, and come to class ready to learn. I can think of many dozens of times over the last 6 years in Northampton when a tiered support specialist stepped in to support a student in a way that helped both that student as well as the rest of the students in my class. Tiered support specialists help de-escalate students who have become particularly dysregulated, which helps teaching continue in the classroom while that student gets a needed break and adult support. Without their support multiple times a week, I would have students in my class who are not ready to learn because their thoughts are stuck in something that's oftentimes small but not at all insignificant that requires them to take a break from the classroom with a skilled educator. If one person were trying to do the 2 jobs of the tiered support specialist at Bridge Street School next year, I imagine 3 things would happen. She would not be able to support the social, emotional, behavioral needs of the students across the 7 grades, pre-K through 5, which would lead to more students experiencing larger social difficulties. These individual students whose needs weren't being met would contribute to a greater level of unease and chaos in the building, which would disrupt the learning for even more students. And she herself would experience a level of burnout that would be untenable. I would be remiss if I didn't also address the reduction of the administrative assistant positions at the elementary level. A primary responsibility we have as educators is to maintain the safety of our students. Our administrative assistants, among their many other responsibilities, maintain our attendance records and are our gatekeepers in terms of who comes in the building. If you don't spend your day working in a public school building, you might not know what it's like to go through your day with an underlying feeling of unease about the violence that might walk through your door, as we all too often hear about in the news. As with our tiered support specialists, I don't even know all the things our administrative assistants do behind the scenes. What I do know is that they help our schools run smoothly, and when they're not there, it is sometimes the principal who takes on their responsibilities because there is no one else available. That doesn't seem like a viable way to run a school. Although I have spoken specifically about how the effects will affect an elementary classroom at my school, I think I can speak generally for educators across the district when I tell you that none of the proposed cuts make sense to us. The same scenarios I've described at Bridge Street School are replicated from preschool through grade 12. The staff whose positions would be cut provide essential services. There are not other people in any building who can reasonably take up the slack for any other positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. I just wanted to note before we switch to our next speaker, and I think this is very important, and Dr. Morgan raised it. The schools are already struggling with understaffing, right? I've heard that at our high schools, for example, Principal Worley has told us that we are something like 8 general ed teachers and 4 special ed teachers short at baseline. And I want to make something very clear for the public that I think has been very unclear in the public discourse about school funding. We have heard a figure again and again, 14%, 14%, 14%, that the schools have grown by 14%. And that makes them sound very expensive and very unwieldy. I want to help you put that number into context. The schools cost a certain amount of money every year. The next year, they cost on average 4% more for the past 7 years in a row. So last year, they were about 3% more expensive than the year before, and we're seeing the same thing this year. The schools did not become 14% more expensive. What the 14% represents is how much of a greater space and share of the budget this mayor needs to give to the schools to actually fully include them permanently in our budget, because they have been paid with bits and pieces and odds and ends and almost treated like an ugly stepchild of our budget. But they belong in the base operating costs. And once they are there, their growth is very stable and predictable. So I just wanted to say that before I pass it back. And of course, as I said before at the beginning, we will go through very reasonable, simple, smooth ways to grow that budget and grow that share of the budget for the schools in a way that meets all of our constituents' needs.
And Councilor Rothenberg, sorry, before you switch over, just want to make sure you have time for that presentation, because there's now 18 minutes left in the presentation form.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Good evening. So I am here to speak about the financial repercussions of these cuts for our district. The reality is this: we have insufficient funding for our schools. Not only, as Dr. Morgan has eloquently laid out, are there significant impacts to the quality of the education we're able to provide, but this is going to end up costing the district more money over time. Simple reality is this: as we remove services, as we remove service providers that provide interventions at stages 1, 2, and 3, that means more students are going to fall behind. And what happens when students fall behind is they end up qualifying for special education services. That means we're going to end up with more students on individualized education plans. That also means special education services costs are going to go up, and special education is expensive. As individualized education plans are legally binding, the more students that we have on plans means more special education staff will have to be added. What usually happens as we add special education staff for those students that deserve and need those services is we reduce the amount of general education staff that we have. The impact in that is a loss of programming. So at the elementary level, that may look like a loss of programs. A number of years ago, there used to be elementary school band. That no longer exists. Enrichment programs, specials, those are the things that go, art and music. At the high school level, we lost a culinary arts program that was wildly popular and was a place for students at all levels and all grades to succeed. What will happen is we will lose elective courses, things that students love and need, things like history, genocide studies, for example, things like sculpture and ceramics, things that are enriching and create well-rounded students. Fundamentally, we end up getting caught in a cyclical pattern. The cyclical pattern is this: as the more special ed students we have in our district, the less programming we have. The less programming we have, the less electives we have, the less enrichment opportunities we have, the more families will withdraw their students and send them to charter schools, and then our enrollment will go down, and our funding will go down, and our city will have to pay to send more kids to charter schools. It's a pattern. It just goes around and around and around in a circle. And fundamentally, that is the road we have started to travel down. Another thing, the proposed budget as it is does not account for any new students that require services. And I can tell you, in my 14, 15 years teaching, I have never seen a year where we didn't get new students on 504s or IEPs. It's just an impossibility. And so the reality is we are going to have to add staffing. I want to touch on the high school very briefly. As it is, our schedule is already too tight. We already don't have seats to put students in. We run less electives than we used to. This year, we cannot run Black History. This year, there's a lot of other classes we can't run. I'm the chair of the social studies department, so I know that department best. But as we lose teachers, we lose the clubs they advise sometimes. We lose specialized classes that they may be the only one that teach. Currently, lots of students won't get their requests. Right now, there is a very, very long waiting list for AP Psychology, AP Chemistry, AP Biology. Students depend on those courses. Spanish 1, there's no seats left. There's a lot of students that want to take Spanish. They have two options. They can wait a year. In their sophomore year, they can start a foreign language, which doesn't seem like a great option, or they can take Latin because French is also full. This is not appropriate. The smaller classes is part of what brings kids to Northampton High School. That's something we need to protect. We are 12 general ed teachers below where we are supposed to be. The last thing I want to very briefly touch on is that this is a repeat of school year from 2017-2018. What happened was the WINS model came in, which was an inclusion model. Previously, there were substantially separate programs. So for instance, Bridge Street School had a student for kids with autism spectrum disorder, two programs in fact, and an LD program for students with very specific learning disabilities. Jackson Street had a program called the Alternative Learning Program. We had programming for kids. The city made a commitment. To full inclusion, and they laid off a tremendous amount of staff. And what happened was those students used to come in, they used to have a classroom teacher that was also their liaison, who they did a lot of some academics with, depended on the student. And then there were para-educators in that program. And those para-educators would go into the various classrooms to help them be included, depending on their individual needs. And when full inclusion began, they laid off or eliminated 22 positions for para-educators. Well, if you go back to the newspaper and you look at those years, you will see about the chaos that ensued. You will see and hear about the violence that was happening, particularly at Bridge Street School. You will see about injuries for students, injuries for educators. And so what happened is they had to add staff back, because the reality is full inclusion costs money. You have to put certain students with full-time para-educators so that they are able to access the education which they are legally entitled to, and so that behavior can be managed so that all students can be in a safe learning environment. So the reality is, whether or not we want to move forward with a full inclusion model or a substantially separate program model, that's a conversation for another time. Right now, however, it needs to be addressed that this program, the WINS model, was not built into the city's funding. And that is a huge problem. So when they talk about there not being enough funding for the schools, insufficient funding is a result of bringing in a new program and not funding it properly.
I better give it over to Al.
Absolutely.
On the time.
So my last thing is, the schools need the funding. It's really simple. Our kids are worth it.
Now I'm going to bring in Al Simon, and I want him to show us how, while our class sizes are approaching the bottom 5% in the state, because they are so large, our savings accounts are in the top 5%. Well, he'll give you his numbers.
Good evening. I have a few slides. Can we go to the first one? Actually, my bio. All right. Hold off on the first slide. Just go into the camera. Just an explanation why I'm sitting here. I moved to Northampton 5 years ago from Windsor, Connecticut, and there I was an elected member of the town council for 18 years. 6 of them were as deputy mayor. 12 of those years were chair of the finance committee. There are a lot of similarities between Windsor and Northampton, some differences. One difference is we had a town manager form of government. So the town council itself was the highest authority. We employed the town manager and provided oversight. He worked for us. So we had final say on the budget. We could increase it or decrease it as we felt appropriate at the appropriate time. So let's go to the first slide. So a lot of talk about a deficit from the mayor. The status of Northampton actually is exactly the opposite of deficit. It is surplus, 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 surplus. And so I looked at the independent audit, and I went back to 2012. That was an arbitrary figure. I wanted at least 10 years to see what is the history, in fact, of budget surplus or deficit. And what you see is the trend of surplus since that time, which is, until we get to the pandemic year, really an unbroken chain of higher surpluses every single year. And this past year, ending June of 23, you can see we had almost an $8 million budget surplus. The chart you're looking at has 2 components only. I looked at the revenues and the expenditures. The number at the bottom in blue, if you can see the blue, are the amount of revenues over budget, that we underestimated. And the number on top is the amount of expenditure that we had budgeted but did not spend. And what you see here is that ever since 2016, in fact, that our budget surplus has been about $4 million or higher every single year, except for the COVID year of 2020. So you cannot obviously have a deficit and a surplus at the same time. And this surplus is certified by the state of Massachusetts and our independent auditors. And I have every reason to believe that is correct. I'm sorry?
Does it include ARPA money?
No, it does not include ARPA money. This is strictly revenues and expenditures and not any other certified free cash. So obviously the number in reality is even higher than this. Next one, please. So then I wanted to look at the amount of cash that we actually had.
Is this the next one?
No, next one.
Okay, this one.
Yeah, right here. So this is cash on hand, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'll probably run out of adjectives to describe how astounding the amount of cash that Northampton has. I've called it here a mountain of cash because it's really an extraordinary figure based on my experience. And you can see how successful the stability plan was over time and putting money into savings accounts. There are two figures here. The first, the bottom number, the blue number, is what's called the unassigned general fund. That is where the stabilization accounts are. The number at the top, the brownish color, is the assigned general fund. That is money that has been moved with the intent to be spent in certain ways, but has not been spent. All of this money, every single dollar, remains under complete city control. The city can change what it's spent on if it wants to. It can spend it, it cannot spend it. Some appropriations will require 5 votes from the council, some will require 6. But the point is, it's completely under city control. And that mountain to the right, just so you know, totals $50 million. There's an additional $35 million in cash that is not on this chart because there are restrictions tied to that money, and so is not completely under city control. Thank you. Can we go to the next one? As you know, our bond rating agencies give us reports every once in a while. The last report that is available, which is online on the city's website, had this interesting comment from September of 22, that Northampton consistently maintains reserves higher than the median for comparably rated state peers. That puts us in the top 50% by that statement. And that is, as you also noticed, prior to the receipt of the ARPA monies, which just blew the top off the total savings. I decided to try to find some comparison data. Next slide, please. And I was able to find the website for the Division of Local Services for the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. And they have a great database there that you can sort and filter. And so I decided to sort it by total stabilization fund balance from high to low. And what did I find? But Northampton has the 9th highest total fund balance of 351 Massachusetts municipalities. That's incredible for a town of this size. Let's go to the next one. I sorted again by total stabilization funds as a percentage of budget. Do we not have the title on here?
Oh.
It's okay. That's all right. If you look at our fund balances as the percentage of the total budget, what you are going to find is that Northampton is now 15th highest out of 351 for having cash on hand as a percent of budget. And if you look a little bit closer and you look only at cities with budgets of $100 million or more, and there are quite a few, there are at least 25% of the municipalities are $100 million or over. For communities with $100 million or over budget, we are first in percentage of cash against budget. That is astounding that there is that much cash in a town of this size. So what it looks like to me is the stability plan has had a priority to generate cash. It's done it very, very successfully. Unfortunately, the stability plan is not providing sufficient recurring funds to the Northampton Public Schools, and that is why we're having this discussion today.
All right, thank you. So I will just run us through some suggested solutions or paths, or as we say, a map towards solutions. MAP stands for Municipal Appropriation Plan, because of course the budget is the biggest appropriation that we make every year. So the first recommended step, and this one comes directly from the DOR. It is quite a misunderstanding to say that the DOR suggests the best practice is 5 to 7% of your budget, generating that much in free cash and saving it away. That is not at all what it says if you read the whole context. What it says is that every single city has to decide for themselves anew every year how much money should be going into savings. And they recommend every year, and especially this year when most cities have very high reserves because of COVID, and as Mr. Simon said, we have had high reserves for a long time. Especially this year, you should be looking at your policies about building and saving reserves. The reason you generate free cash is twofold. One is to protect yourself from risk of going into the red, and the other is to build savings. We have, I would suggest, a full savings account. But what I am suggesting is not that you take my word for it and not that I get to decide because I am just one counselor representing one ward's full of people. I think that you should create a budget and fiscal oversight committee that should determine the year's target amounts for free cash based on your target savings amounts. What this will do is this will allow your mayor to know whether she has any more money to work with in the budget. For example, you could give her an extra several $1 million and say, make your budget that much bigger. We're only going to put 2% into savings this year because our savings are already full. We don't need to focus on that target. We need to make our budget bigger right now. The next thing you can do is institute an annual school committee goal setting process. Now, I want to be clear about what kinds of goals these are. This is setting a target for what you want your schools to look like. What does Northampton want their schools to look like? How do we want to rank in the state? How big do we want our classes to be? So this is a target that we would set before the school committee sets its budget. They would think about how they're going to gradually be thinking about their hiring and so on to meet these goals. The third is to establish annual operational audits of selected major departments. This should happen before union contracts are negotiated with things like fire, police, DPW. This will help you really have a better sense of whether you have enough people, too many people, enough equipment, too many pieces of equipment, and if you're doing things as efficiently as possible. This, number 3, can also make room in your budget. It can make your expenditures smaller. You can bring in certified auditors for this, or you can bring in retired mayors from other cities, retired heads of DPW, things like that, who can really help bring a fresh perspective. And I've heard that you would be surprised, not only can you save money, but you sometimes can even end up with a better service when you put the two heads together with an expert from another city.
Counselor, that is time. If you could wrap up within 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, and I think this is one of the most important ones, create an opportunity for the people of Northampton to collaborate in budgeting. Now, again, we have a representative form of government. The people of Northampton have representatives. I would propose that the councilors have town halls early in the budgeting season so that we can bring them the mayor's first view budget and say, sort of a teach-in, here's what this budget looks like for the community. Is this meeting your needs? Is this what you were hoping for your schools? Is this what you were hoping for your DPW? Have those conversations early. So essentially what this map is this is getting a jump on the planning so that when the mayor comes to us, and I would suggest she shouldn't come to us in December, she should come to us in October with her first view of the budget. We immediately go down this list and start doing these 4 things so that by the time we get to May, we have hit so many targets and the mayor has so many parameters to work within that by the time we're in May and June, we are celebrating this mayor for her wonderful work on this budget. We know she's working hard. We see how well her fiscal stability plan is doing what it's intended to do. She's hitting targets like bananas. We just want to help you define more targets so that you can end up with a more well-rounded budget. And we think that we should be doing part of that work with you. In closing, I would say that this year, you really ought to just spend your free cash, spend from your stability fund. We have the money to do it, and we have a map forward that makes it make sense because we can solve this long term. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Counselor and panel. Kathy, would you stop sharing your screen?
Be on mute.
Okay, thank you. So now we will have a discussion and questions for the council with the counselors, the mayor, and the panel. Questions for the panel. And Mayor Shara, did you want? Yes, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we can respond to some of the slides if you'd like, or I don't know if counselors have questions. You know, what we need is a plan that deals with the deficit. And we need one that deals with the deficit next year, not down, you know, years down the road. We're not simply, what we're facing is not simply a $4.77 million deficit in FY 2025 just for 1 year. We have a structural deficit that's been growing rapidly for the last 3 years and will continue to grow if we don't address the disparity between the fast rise and the recurring expenses in the Northampton Public Schools and the city streams of recurring revenues. So, you know, that is really what we need to address. And if counselors have questions about the slides that they saw, we can respond.
Counselor Elkins.
Yeah. So first of all, I certainly don't have any question for our educators who joined us today. I defer to their expertise and their experience in the schools. This isn't a question of, you know, what we would do if we were able to, but that's not the position we're in. I am wondering, so my questions, I guess, are for Councilor Rothenberg and Mr. Simon. Do you have an idea of what it will cost to continue level staffing for 2 years? And do you know, so in other words, you know how much more it will cost the city next year and the year after?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Elkins. From everything that I can see, as I said, the rate of growth for the school spending has been 4% for the past 7 years. It was 3% for this year and 3% for the year before. That is from all sources of spending. So that is the rate of growth of the schools every year.
We're looking at a 17% increase to fund what we did this year over into next year. Can you explain how you...
Yes, so that is not the rate of spending of the schools. That is the rate of spending of the city in the city budget. You have been funding the schools from different sources and appropriations, as you like to say, one-time funds have been used. We are suggesting that through the use of operational audits, getting community input, setting a free cash reserve target that will make your budget bigger, you actually have room to fit the schools as they are squarely in your budget. And that growth will be a steady 3 to 4 as it has been for 7 years. You just need to get over that hurdle of getting them in there to begin with. And I suggest you follow the map to get there.
Councilor Rothenberg, I mean, do you agree, putting aside whether or not it's in the school department or elsewhere, that spending more money than the city brings in revenue is eventually a deficit?
Yes, I would agree, and I don't see that you're at risk of that.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that just a little bit more. Do you, and you agree that we have to continue to fund capital spending and infrastructure?
I think that it would be very important for the mayor and the councilors to make sure that all of the spending is in alignment with the needs and goals of the community. I cannot speak for the entire community on what should be your top priorities. I can only say that I know education is one of them.
Okay. A question for Mr. Simon. Can you explain the difference between an audit report and the quarterly and annual reports that Director Nardi prepares for the city?
I cannot, because I have not seen those. I do not have access to all the information.
The quarterlies are the variables, the variance reports, if we're hitting our estimates.
I don't have those.
Over, under.
I had only the publicly accessible information on the website. I've always found that the audit contains most of what you need to know. But I was curious about those quarterlies, because that tells everybody where they think they're going to be at the end of the year. And I am very curious to know what the town finance staff is projecting as the surplus for this fiscal year. They have a very, very good idea at this point in time.
So, Mr. Simon, are you aware that there's an entire web page in which we have the budget every year going back, and every quarterly report that Director Nardi has presented on the website? It's readily available.
Oh, that may be. I haven't looked at everything that's possibly available.
Okay.
I just know that there's so many in Capital City.
And can I ask you, so it's your contention that we have $50 million in cash to spend?
Under city control, sure. I know what's happened is you've put invisible fences around a lot of it. The unassigned is where the stabilization funds are, and those are invisible fences because the city has the authority to move that if it wants to, with either 5 or 6 votes on the council, depending on the fenced money that you want to look at. It's all under city control, and the state recognizes that by putting it into a single category. Actually the bond agencies recognize that when they list reserves as a single number, and the independent audit does as well.
And the bond rating also uses the assigned. I don't think you mentioned that. The bond rating uses the assigned figures as well, but that's okay.
Okay, so just backing up a little bit though, so you do agree that like the city's annual budget and the quarterly reports would be the best source for looking at our projected revenues and our past performance over time?
Councillor Elkins, the audits are merely the annual certified figure. What the quarterly reports are the finance director's quarterly reports. They are summarized every year. He has looked at 12 years, and they have been certified by an outside source. So I would say the audits are an even better source for the kind of work we're doing and the kind of analysis we're doing.
Well, I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, the quarterly reports are meant to be the revenues and the projections against which we can measure. But in any case, Mr. Simon, you didn't even look at them. So I mean, you were town councilor, didn't you pass? Wait, can I finish my question?
Yeah.
Please don't interrupt.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Simon, when you were town councilor in Windsor, you went through the budget process. I mean, didn't you rely on your city's finance director or finance committee?
Of course.
I mean, you didn't rely on audits, did you? You relied on the budget process like we are.
Of course we did. And as the finance chair, we'd meet with the town manager and go over the quarterly reports. We'd meet with the auditor and go over the audit reports. We did all of that, sure. But I'm not in that position here. I'm a citizen trying to figure out why this city can't fund its schools.
But you didn't look at the actual budget or the quarterly reports. Okay. I have a few more questions, but if others have questions.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Councillor Elkins, I just think that I see what you're saying, and I think those kinds of detailed reports are a great place for that committee that I'm proposing that's going to be setting the free cash. Because in that committee, to look at that level of granular detail, that's where you're going to want to say, what kind of revenue is this? How stable is this? How much will market fluctuations, right? He's looking at annual trends, but this one that's going to set year to year what they think the free cash target should be should definitely be going to that level of detail. So thank you for pointing that out.
Councillor Perry and then Councillor Moulton.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it short. I just have a question. I'm looking at this map, and it looks like some ideas to create some committees and oversight things, which what I have learned in my time in municipal government is that creating these things takes time. I've been told that this right now is it's a dire situation because it is a dire situation. And while I think that these are maybe some steps we can look at, right now I'm actually shocked that there aren't any hard data or numbers to explain what we're going to do in 8 months next year. And so I was wondering maybe if our finance director could explain how when we take one-time funds, how it compounds. So, the previous year there was a $2.3 million deficit. This year is I think a $4.77 million deficit. And why spending is not going to get us out of that. So perhaps we can get back to that. Director Nardi, are you able to?
So Laura, would you be able to make Director Nardi a co-host?
But I just want to talk about the numbers and have a map, a fiscal map.
You should be able to unmute.
Okay, Director Nardi, welcome.
Hi. So yes, if we look at using that budget, there is a $4 million deficit the first year. And then if you look at the second year, there is a $4.8 million deficit. And then FY 2027, that increases to 5.6 million. And then FY 28 to 7.5 million. And then FY 2029, 9.1 million. So each time we're using reserves and we're not rolling it into the budget, that is going to compound, just like we started with 2.3 and we added 1.2, and this year it was 4.8, and now with all the work that the mayor has done in order to provide the 700,000 additional money, and we've got the stabilization and the Smith College gift, we've done a lot of work in the budget to push our revenues, and we've cut other budgets back or other priority or other goals in order to make sure that the budget that she's presented is able to fit into a $3 million override and make it in reoccurring, so that we can last 4 years. We can roll that in, as Councilor Rothenberg spoke about. That's the really important piece, is rolling that in, so then we can have moderate 3 to 4% increases going forward. And that's the budget that the mayor's presented. That's what our budget can sustain. But the budget that that the school committee has presented has significant shortfalls each and every year that the budget cannot just sustain.
Thank you. I'll pass along and I'll come back. I know there's other people.
Councilor Moulton.
Yes, thank you. I want to go back to the original question asked by Councilor Elkins of Councilor Rothenberg and Mr. Simon, because I don't think we got an answer. I want to know what your calculations show that the Northampton Public School budget would be in FY 26 using the level services budget that has been proposed for FY 25 of 42.8 million, and taking into account the compounding that Director Nardi just spoke about. What have you estimated would be the budget that we'd be looking at for the NPS in FY 26?
44.8? It sounds like it's 44.08.
So the increase over FY 25 would be another 2 million.
Actually, that was at 3%. I think the average was 4%. The most recents were 3%. I mean, I'm speculating based on your trends. I can't do this work by myself. This is the work for the city to do.
Well, this is the work that I believe we just heard from Director Nardi would result in.
If you don't change your budget, you have to change your budget. You have to make more room in your budget.
President Jared, could we have some order here, please?
Please let Councilor Moulton finish.
Okay. You're talking about work that I believe I just heard Director Nardi refer to in her predictions about the steadily increasing deficit. So she has come up with some specific figures. You're saying that you would be looking for a roughly $2 million increase in the school budget for FY 26. That would maintain the level of services.
Yes, I'm looking for that, and I would suggest that you can increase the size of your city budget to accommodate that.
I'm sorry, what? You increase the size of the what budget?
City.
The total municipal budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Clemmer.
Thank you. Councilor Rothenberg, do you have any experience with finance from from schooling? I know you weren't at the meetings the MMA meetings where we learned a lot about it, but I'm curious about what kind of experience you have that around.
About my background. So I am a retired classical musician. I retired when I was 20 years old. I had traveled the world when I was a child. I specialized as a child in that career in one-on-one trainings with mentors all over the world. So when I learn new things, I learn from masters. And that is what I have done as a city councilor, is to talk to the DOR as much as I can. And I was just on the phone with our independent auditor, Scanlon, today. And I appreciate the expertise that Simon has brought. And I would love to learn even more from our director, Nardi. So no, I'm a fast learner and I'm doing my job as a councilor.
It just seems like, since you have no professional experience, you've dismissed the advice of qualified city the financial director Nardi from the mayor. You don't work with other councils to try to figure this out, but you go to outside people to do this work. So it's just a little confusing why you wouldn't work with any of the other councilors and try to bring your plans to fruition. And, instead having a meeting tonight, a few days before the budget is, we have to vote on it on Thursday. I mean, this has been dragging on. I just don't understand, what's happening.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean about not working with other councilors. I have a caucus. We're a caucus of 3. I can talk to one more councilor without violating open meeting law. My door is open if someone wants to come and be my 4th person. As far as the date of this meeting and the scheduling of this meeting, I did not call for this meeting. My offer was to help the mayor make plans privately that she might be willing to get behind. And the response of the 6 councilors who are not in my caucus and the mayor was to have this be a public meeting. So I'm happy to help in whatever way is most helpful. I think this is the best way for me to actually be able to talk to all of you without violating open meeting law. And I think it's important to remember that we have until June 30th to pass this budget. And I think right now we still have an unsolved budget, but I hope very much that next year we get an earlier jump on this. To return back to something that Councillor Perry said, that this would take a long time. Councillor Perry, what the DOR recommends is that we do this kind of work every single year. We need to learn how to do this. We need to start earlier, start in October, so that by the time we get to this point, we are all on the same page. That is my goal, and I hope that is your goal as well.
Well, I'm a little confused by this whole presentation. This stuff was on Facebook for weeks, and on the charts, the money went down during COVID. That's what the surplus is for, and why we have these funds, and why, we're cautious. A lot of my constituents wrote to me, and your constituents wrote to me as well, and people from all over Northampton, and they are concerned about what's going on here with this budget. They want us, they want the whole city taken care of. Like at Community Resource, we just heard about the sidewalks that Councillor Dubs was concerned about, and you. So it's not, you have this group, but it's other people are concerned about what's going on too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally take into consideration all of those in this solution, right? We don't even probably really need to touch the savings. We really need to adjust our free cash projection.
Been explained
We
tonight.
don't.
Please let Councilor Rothenberg finish.
Sure, sorry.
We don't probably need to touch our savings long term. We just probably would decide. I would think that this committee that I'm proposing would probably recognize that our savings are full already, but I leave that to the committee to decide. So really we're talking about not generating as much free cash and just putting that instead towards operational expenses. We also hear from people that yes, they want sidewalks and they want flood pumps. We heard from Joe Comifer tonight that seems like there might be some promising work on flood pumps, but I too am concerned that our budget is not yet showing that kind of prioritization that we want to see in sidewalks, flood pumps, and schools. I think that's another reason to have these community town halls that I'm suggesting. But absolutely, everybody's concerns about bond rating, reserves, city services, process, all of this is factored into what I've put forward today. The many different perspectives that people have and the many different concerns that they have are so important. That's the whole point point of my map is that you need more parameters so that you come out with a more well-rounded budget. That's what I would encourage the mayor to do. That's what I would encourage the council to do. That is my dream. I think we have the same vision.
Okay.
Councillor Clemmer, did you have anything
Yeah,
further?
I wish there was more talk about your plans for the budget for this year. Instead, but I'm gonna just end it there.
Thank you. I think it's a simple fix. I mean, we're $2 million short. Fill that hole. Get to work ASAP on FY26 planning. Involve the whole community. That's the plan. It's very simple.
I'll go to Councillor Labarge and then Councillor Dubs.
Yes. I want to thank the panel, all of you, for being here and everybody listening to what was presented. I have to say that Councilor Rothenberg, you did mention at City Council that you apparently were trying to make an appointment with our mayor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was that appointment made?
No, this was what I received in response.
What did you receive in response?
The instruction that I would be making a public presentation.
Okay. Anyways, my question is, why wasn't these issues brought up to us councilors about the ideas that you had? It could have been brought up at City Council that you would like a special meeting with councilors to try to work a path into finding a way to get the money.
Oh, thank you. So truly, I am working as fast as I can. And my sense as a new councilor here and reading the room of the politics here was that the mayor really enjoys and appreciates her authority. And I really wanted to give her the room to come up with a solution and to keep encouraging the public to ask the mayor to come up with that solution, to say, she can do it. She can do it. We're just waiting for her to do it. She can do it. And then in the end, I thought maybe I can meet with her privately, maybe because I haven't seen her do it yet. And then she asked for this public meeting, and I think it's a great idea. It didn't occur to me sooner, and I'm glad to know we can do things like this.
I think it's a great idea of this communication coming forth. But I agree with the councilor from Ward 2. You have never presented that communication to us councilors. And I think it would have been a great idea to have that communication, all of us councilors together on a special meeting. That's my idea with it anyways.
Thank you, Councilor Labarge.
And also, I would like to know from you, what is your plan now? Since the voting is coming up on Thursday, what is your plan? How are we going to prevent an override?
Oh, personally, and on behalf of Ward 3, I certainly don't think we are at the point of needing an override. As I said, I think we have enough room in the free cash projections to just grow our budget. So I really don't think we're short on money or revenue right now, personally. And I think that most of Ward 3, which is more of a working class ward, feels that way as well, from what I can tell from my constituents. So I think we're sort of putting the cart ahead of the horse. I think when we talk about the next year's budget, we should see if we really have enough recurring revenue to fund everything following those 4 steps that I laid out. And I think you will. But if you find that you don't, you could look at an override. And if you do start looking at overrides, I just want to say on behalf of Ward 3, it's very important that if you're going to say an override is for schools, you must legally restrict that money to only go to schools. Because public confidence in Ward 3 and throughout the city, as far as I can tell, is at an all-time low because for years we have been paying overrides and we have been told they're for schools. And yet here we are with the schools underfunded. So don't mistake that you think that this year people are going to go for it. I think this year with these cuts, people are very wary and they don't think necessarily that this money will go to schools. Otherwise, how did we get here? That's a big question.
I also think that our financial director should answer that question. Is that Prop 2.5 override going to go strictly to the public schools? So maybe our financial director, Councilor Jarrett, could answer that question, please.
Or perhaps Mayor Shara would
Yes,
be
exactly.
more appropriately making the directive around where, or the proposal of where money will go.
Right.
Sure. So the we are, first of all, for FY25, we've adjusted our approach, and so one, we've adopted more aggressive revenue estimates in order to increase the appropriation of Northampton Public Schools. But additionally, we are pulling $2 million out of the stabilization fund. So that, to be able to roll that $2 million in and have it be recurring and available for the schools annually, not then have it be one time, that is what the override would be needed for. So to have $2 million added to the school budget, we need a $3 million override. Otherwise, in 1 year, we would have a hole again that would have to be filled with another override.
Thank you, Mayor.
I will call on Councilor Dubs, then on myself, as I haven't asked the question yet, and then we'll go to Councilor Elkins.
Thank you, President Jarrett. I just wanted to respectfully reject the notion that two other councilors have made, that Councilor Rothenberg did not try to work with the council earlier. If you all recall, a few weeks ago, both Councilor Rothenberg and I put an order on the table for the council to discuss the option to opt in, to give us all the opportunity to collaborate on this and talk to each other as councilors and work on it together. I believe that Councilor Rothenberg already tried to work with the council on this, and it's only now that she's being singled out and people pointing fingers as if she didn't try to talk to us sooner. That's not true. So let's please not put that notion in the air. And I guess I just wanted to also mention that since Councilor Clemmer talked about the fact that sidewalks are a big issue for me, I just want to mention that the DPW budget is being cut. So the city isn't giving extra money for sidewalks right now. So why are we comparing sidewalks to schools? I don't understand that. I just want to repeat that Councilor Rothenberg has tried to work with us already, and I supported her on that, and I still support her efforts. And I think that we should try to level fund our schools. I still think we have time. This is a crisis, and we have the power to fix it, to solve the crisis. Let's just do it, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dubs. So I wanted to touch on two things. One was the $50 million figure, and perhaps I'm not sure where that comes from. When I add up all of the funds, I get somewhere around 34, something like that. And many of those funds are in enterprise funds. And as we know, the state of our water, sewer, and stormwater is certainly a very big concern. And many of those funds are for projects that will happen or are scheduled to happen, that are critical, and in many cases mandated by the state. So touching our enterprise funds, I think, would be very unwise. But I wondered if the mayor or Director Nardi could explain, what is being shown in that figure that represents 50 million. Did you have an understanding of that? Does that make sense? Did that make sense to you? And is that money that is available in some way, or is it money that is set aside for future projects?
So So the numbers in that infographic come from the annual audit, as was explained, and that's completed by our independent auditor, Scanlon and Associates. It's from fiscal year 2023, and as Mr. Simon pointed out, there is unassigned and assigned numbers in here. The unassigned come from three sources. Those are from the stabilization, the general stabilization funds. So it doesn't have anything to do with the enterprise funds. It is the five of our general stabilization funds, which is the fiscal, general, capital, climate, and what used to be the opioid, at least in that figure. The opioid funds obviously have been revoked and they've been moved to a special revenue fund for the purposes of the settlement agreement. In addition to those five funds for 2023, it's also part of the undesignated fund balance, or what we refer to as free cash. That number is in there as well. In addition to that, it's also made up of the overlay account balance as of 6/30. So the assigned fund balances are not readily available for use. These funds are for the unassigned. So you have the stabilization, which we talked about, which are special purposes, and the council voted those purposes. So we do have the general and the fiscal stability fund that is generally could be used for the operating budget. The undesignated fund balance, that's the free cash that we talk about that actually seeds those reserves and has seeded them again over 12 years. As noted, the policies that we have increased our reserves, our revenues. We've exceeded revenues, and we have had tailings from expenses. And in part, that was planned because when that started, we didn't have any reserves. The other piece of that is the overlay account. And the overlay is actually from is the amount of money that we set aside to pay abatements and exemptions. So like the senior and veterans work off, the money comes from there. In addition, at the end of the year, if we have taxes that have not been paid, those are liabilities that show up on this auditing report, and we need to show that we are able to pay it. So technically, the information that was pulled is not just our stabilization accounts. And the money is just not readily available. And this report is not really a good indication of what we have available for operating costs. This report is actually designed for, and the wording is used more for agencies that are looking at our bond rating or for doing bond rating. That gives us more credit because we have all of these different funds, like the overlay, and to cover our liabilities and our debt. And we have a good undesignated fund balance, and we have stabilization accounts. So that's what the unassigned is for. The assigned balances are not readily available for use because these funds are basically money that is held over from the prior closed year from capital projects, budgets that we continue to be in the works. The encumbrances are tied to contracts and agreements. So they are projects we've already started to invest in. So I don't see how they would be available to use for other purposes. So that is the 50 million, and it's not just reserves that are available for projects.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second question is the thought that Councilor Rothenberg put forward that we basically anticipate having a much smaller amount of free cash, in the future, which I hear that you've already done to some extent. Going forward, what are we seeing in terms of the amount of free cash that we estimate, and what of that will we anticipate funding our capital needs? I guess what I'm trying to get at is what could conceivably be available, not necessarily within our fiscal policies. And even if we were able to use, even if we decided to use some of that, how long would it take before we would run out of monies?
So yes, we have projected higher revenues to cover our expenses. So we do not expect as high free cash going forward. We started making those changes in FY 2024 as it asked. I project like $3.6 million in possible earnings towards the undesignated fund balance at the end of FY 2024. Again, we've talked a lot about the 3 to 5%. Used to be 3 to 5% to generate in free cash. DOR has upped that to 5 to 7% for most communities because of the uncertainty out there, that they want to make sure communities have the flexibility to address issues. So we, as our policy, still try to target the 5%. As noted, our general fund stabilization fund is only at 4.8%, I think, so it's just under the 5%. So the 3.6 is estimated like 3% of our budget for FY 2024. 2025, as the mayor pointed out, in order to include that additional $737,000, which brings the total reserve funds that we're using to $1.98 million, so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So the $737,000 added makes $1.98 million we're using in reserve. So we're using $2 million of our fiscal stability, which will reduce that fund, which is only at 4.1 million now, significantly. So I'm not sure I captured the last question that you had.
The question is, if we, how quickly would we run out, assuming we want to also fund capital needs? And I did some calculations. I don't know how accurate they are, that it would be 3 years, less than that. If the override doesn't pass, it would be less than 2 years.
So yes, and I tried to do a graphic because I know in every budget book we provide the fiscal stability plan, which is a 5-year plan, which shows each year how we are going to match or what our shortfall will be between revenues and expenditures. That's in every single budget book. It's also presented in the mayor's January presentation. And I put together a graphic, Laura, if I may share, where I tried to make that a little easier to understand, because there's a lot happening in those spreadsheets, and I even have to sit and go through them very carefully. So if we use our reserves following the actual plans we have, and let me just see if I could share. Do I have the ability to share host tools?
You should.
Share screen. It didn't come up. Where did you come up? Share. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see that?
I can, yes.
Okay. So let me just hit the slideshow. That's not what I wanted. This is a hot slide I wanted. So this slide shows our reserves as they currently stand. These are all the 4 stabilization funds. And this shows us using our reserves, but continuing to fund capital plan as the capital improvement program shows, and to follow our current policies. So the first year we used the 4.0 or $1 million to fund our general fund budget. And then the second year, we only have $929,000, and we've added some interest in there. We've also added a little appropriation from the undesignated fund balance or free cash, seeding these fiscal stability accounts as well. And we now need to use our stabilization account as well to meet the additional, it's $4.8 million, I think. And then the next year, we now have 0 in fiscal stability. We only have 1.2 in stabilization. We now use $556 because remember, stabilization, all these funds are also being used for capital projects. So we don't have enough in there to fund the shortfall created by this larger budget. So we're $3.8 million short, and we don't have enough to fund the budget. This is an FY 2027. So I have, like you have, figured out that it's really 2 years and it depletes all of our reserves. Then if we can, in FY 28, there is no money in reserves. So, and we end up with a, I think the $9.9 million is where we need for FY 2029. So 2028, I believe, is a $7.5 million deficit. Yeah, it's right there. That we can't fill. We have no more reserves. If we do it where we don't do any capital, we just use our reserves. Again, we're using that $4 million for FY 2025. And then we only have this much because we're not getting as much revenue. Remember, the mayor's budget proposal uses pushing revenues. So when we push revenues, we get less free cash. So now we're using the 4.6 million out of stabilization. We're using this amount to cover the budget in FY 2027. There's nothing left in fiscal stability. And then there is money, but not enough to cover the entire 7.5 million. So we're short 2.6. And this assumes we're doing no capital. I save some money for transfers, normal things that might come up during the year, but that is it. So that has been my estimate, that we could survive 2 years. And then really, we can't even get through 2028, even if we don't do any capital.
Thank you for that analysis. So we have about 10 minutes left before our targeted end time. I want to make sure to get to the folks who've raised their hands. We'll go to Councillor Elkins, then Clemmer, then Councillor Rothenberg.
Yeah, I actually have 2 questions for, a question for Director Nardi, and then a question, I think, for Councillor Rothenberg. So, Director Nardi, I have noticed, so you talked about pushing revenues, and that's why we don't anticipate as much free cash. So you've increased projected revenues to greater than 3% in local receipts, and I'm noting that that's more than the Prop 2.5 increase. How do we do that? How do we increase revenue more than Prop 2.5, and what does it mean that we're relying on more than property taxes? Can you told me a little bit about that the other day, if you could explain that again.
Yes, if I may share my screen again. So when you look at the pie chart that the mayor always presents to you, this pie chart shows a total budget based on the mayor's presented budget, but it does show you that 68% of our budget, of our reoccurring revenue, is taxes. So 68.66%, and that makes up 83 million of this 122 million. So if you think about that 68%, of that, 91% of that is our taxes. Now I'm talking about is our personal property and real estate taxes. So this big blue piece and this red piece right here, that makes up 93%, of our total taxes. And that's the amount we can't raise more than 2.5%. So basically every time we go above, we are looking at this percent of the pie right here to make up that difference. And we are also including in that projection, so that's 7% left for taxes, which includes our real estate, our motor vehicle excise, our boat excise, our cannabis a hotel and motel. And while they've been doing well, that's a lot of pressure for 7% of the budget. The other pieces of the pie are charges for services, licenses and permits, fines and forfeits, and miscellaneous revenue, and that makes up about 13%. So this is the portion, the small portion that's got to make up over 2.5%. So we're putting a lot of pressure on those small pieces of revenue to make up the difference every time we keep pushing things above 2.5, because 93% of our budget cannot go there.
Like literally can't go there. And if I can follow up, I had a second question, Councilor Jarrett.
Go ahead.
So Councilor Rothenberg, you talked in your plan about a town hall meetings and a budget and oversight committee. I guess my question is so, you know, we have in city council, we have finance, the mayor is charged by statute and the city charter to have a particular role in the budget process. School committee also has a role. I guess I have two questions. One is it seems like our meetings, which are, you know, required by law to be open and accessible to the public, and you know, everybody has an opportunity to come and hear the quarterly reports and participate. I guess I'm concerned that we would have like a parallel governmental activities, you know, kind of going on throughout the city. And then my second question is how would we choose who to participate in that, and what do we do about folks who can't participate in something like that, or their limited ability to participate, and especially when it's all kind of happening outside of where we're required to have open meetings and that kind of thing. So I'm curious to know how that would work.
Unmuted. Okay, thank you, Councilor Elkins. So the reason I suggested the town hall piece is because it does seem like we are struggling this year with representation of the public. It seems like we are here in our council meetings, often talking with Director Nardi and with the mayor as individuals who are trying to decide if they agree or disagree with her plans. When we are talking about following her plans where she can't see a solution that lasts more than 2 years, that also fully funds schools, that tells me that we're missing some input. We are missing input from the community about what their priorities are, because some of those things could probably be removed from your budget and your expenses. We are missing input from operational audits about where we could be more efficient, because again, that will remove expenses and make things more sustainable. We are missing conversations from our schools about what we want them to look like. So we're letting them drop into the bottom 5th percentile of the state in a city that really values education. And finally, we are losing this very routine referral that goes to a budget oversight committee in other cities like Watertown. A very routine referral that happens at the beginning of every budget season, which is to set the target free cash. Because Director Nardi is right. The reserves don't tell us what we can do with our operating budget. The reserves tell us what our savings are and help inform us when we set a target for how much we need to add to them. When you talk about how we're going to sustain capital expenditures, you're overlooking things like funding capital needs through grants, through debt exclusion, through your wonderful AAA bond rating that allows you to borrow, through overrides that are targeted for projects, through using savings, and yes, through potentially using free cash. So what I'm hearing tonight is a lot of amazing questioning from councilors. And again, as I would say to the public, I am thrilled that we are talking about policy. Councilor Labarge, I'm sorry it's happening so late in the season, it seems. If we would follow this map, we could start this sooner. These are the kinds of conversations that we need to have in detail. These are not the kinds of conversations that we can have in one night with 9 people or 10 or 11 people who are just thinking themselves. This is a community discussion. We need to find solutions for a budget that meets the needs of the community. The community is the city legally of Northampton.
I'm sorry,
Councilor
Councilor Jarrett, can I ask one follow-up?
Go ahead.
So, the CIP already lays all of that out. 100% of it, if you go and look at it, the CIP lays out where we get the funding for every single capital project, including debt exclusion, and lays it out for 5 years where it's projected from. So I guess I just wanted to point that out, that we are certainly not.
Five people
Don't
make that
interrupt,
plan.
please, Councilor
Five
Rothenberg.
people make
Councilor
that
Rothenberg.
plan, and Councilor Elkins is one of them.
Councilor
That is
Rothenberg,
not
just let
democracy.
Councilor Elkins finish, and then you'll get to answer.
And it's certainly laid out, and it is available for review, and then it is, in fact, voted on. I don't, and also the CIP Advisory Committee does not make the plan. It is an advisory committee that the council is, that the mayor is free to reject. But I guess I'm just wondering, are you insinuating or implying that there's some kind of self-dealing or improper, and something improper going on with this, with the way we do the capital improvement projects?
That's not what I'm discussing tonight. What I'm discussing is that you need the community to weigh in on those priorities.
Okay. All right, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councilor Clemmer, and then Councilor Rothenberg, and then Councilor Moulton. We're coming up against the end of our time. I'd like to extend for about 10 more minutes, given that we didn't start our full hour of discussion until 8:25. So we should give a couple more folks chances to speak. So Councilor Clemmer.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to address what Councilor Dubs' response, and all the other departments stayed within their 2.5% budget. And the DPW, they have a negative 1% increase because we aren't funding 2 positions for this year that are not filled. And Director Lascalia is using some of the resources remaining from prior years due to vacancies. So they didn't lose money this year. And as far as the opt-in, that's not a discussion about what's going on and all this planning for months. That was a whole separate thing. And you know, this was done behind closed doors, and you know, that's not the way to get things done. And the way this is happening, it undermines the trust and efficiency of the city's leadership. You know, Director Nardi is an expert. She's been doing this for, please don't laugh, Councilor Rothenberg. She's been doing this for a couple of decades. You know, she knows what she's talking about. And I don't know why you go to outside residents to get information. Do you need a second, Councilor Rothenberg? So
I'm ready.
Thank you, Councilor Clemmer. Did you have anything more?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Councilor Rothenberg.
Yes, I just want to reiterate that what I do as a representative is engage with the public. The public is not required to meet publicly with everyone. The public will have whatever venues they want to meet in where they are comfortable sharing their thoughts. I go everywhere, from Joe's Pizza to Historic Northampton to City Hall chambers to my neighbors on the block. I talk to all different kinds of people, and where they want to organize and how they want to organize is totally up to them. I fully support grassroots organizing. What I'm trying to offer you is a way for you at City Hall to pull that public into your process. Because this is a conversation about values and choosing what to fund. And this community wants to fully fund its schools.
Thank you, Councilor Rothenberg. We'll go to Councilor Moulton.
Thank you. I want to return to the subject of the overrides passed and proposed, and point out that if there are people in the community who don't understand that the general overrides have benefited the schools, they have in 2 very specific ways. They have provided in the decade or so that the fiscal stability plan that is funded by these general overrides has been in effect. They have provided a stable and predictable increase in the school's operating budget that, as Councilor Rothenberg has pointed out, has been between 3 and 4% annually. That replaces what the mayor has repeatedly described as the prior decade of very volatile and unpredictable small increases, or in at least one case, a decrease in the school budget. Secondly, the money that has been raised through these overrides, contributing to the fiscal stability, the general fiscal stabilization fund, has provided the $1.2 million that helped fill the budget gap in the current fiscal year, and the nearly $2 million that's being used to address the continuing budget gap for FY25. So I wanted to ask Director Nardi, you touched on this, I think, in answering Councilor Jarrett's questions, but can you specifically address the notion that using free cash, undesignated cash, for operating expenses in FY26 could replace the need for the $3 million override?
So I'm not sure I understand your question. So if we continue to use our reserves, as the graphic that I showed before, if you're applying just using free cash is going to it seeds all of our other reserves. So if you use that, we're expecting 3.6 million of new funds. We have 1.7 that has not been used. So that adds up to what, I'm sorry, I can't apparently do math on the spot in front of a crowd. But so we've got 5.3 million, and we have a $4 million shortfall this year and a $4.8 million shortfall next year. So we wouldn't be having a lot of generating of the undesignated fund balance. And the concern is how, as we move forward with projects that we need to do for climate change and for all of the ongoing projects and for dealing with our roads and for the borrowing and all of those kind of things under the capital improvement, what would continue to feed those? So if you start using, which we've already started to use, we're pushing our revenues, we're going to generate less free cash as we move forward. Where's the money going to come from after 2 years? Because as you know, I discussed before, we quickly use up our funds. We would start eating away at reserves. We wouldn't be regenerating them, and eventually, as I pointed out, this, as we've all talked about, this grows significantly, and by the year 2030, even if we do we're ending up with a $10 million deficit that we need to address. I really, as our auditor has pointed out, and Councilor Rothenberg has mentioned that she's spoken with Scanlon and Associates. As Tom Scanlon said to you at his meeting, he believes that the city's policies has served us well. The graphic that was shown, we started in 2016 and we have added to our reserves. And where we are today, as he said, is a good place. We do have reserves. We have a plan to use reserves. You should never just grow reserves for the purpose of growing reserves. You should have a plan, and we do have a plan. We have a capital improvement plan that goes on for 5 years. We have a fiscal stability plan where we actually project out growing revenues, growing expenses, and how we're going to deal with them. All of this planning happens, and we start that process by looking at them, talking to people, bringing forth in January the budget projections, revenue and expenses forward to you in January. And we also start thinking about how we fit in the budgets. Each of the departments look at their budgets individually and how they can fit into the parameters of the fiscal stability, because we've made a promise when we go out for a override that we are not going to do so again, that we are going to adhere to fiscal responsible increases so that we can provide city services in a responsible manner.
So one quick follow-up, President Jarrett.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just want to be clear then, while the city could use the 3.6 million that you project in free cash to apply to the operating budget for FY26, that would begin to affect the city's ability to finance many projects, many initiatives, many of our goals across all city departments. If we did that instead of placing an override on the ballot.
Yes. And if we waited, because it's all interconnected, and you start pushing one, it affects the other issues or the other processes that we have. They're all interconnected. And if we wait, that override has to, when we eventually go out for an override, it has to be larger because that deficit is going to grow. So.
Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Councillor Moulton. Are there any other councillors in this second round who haven't spoken who would like to before I go to Councillor Rothenberg? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Rothenberg, who is not Kathy McNally.
Yes, I would just like to close by saying that I think that this presentation and those comments from Director Nardi are a great example of why we have checks and balances in our government. Her plan, while one of the financially responsible ways to do things, is not a socially responsible way to do things. We have many financially responsible paths that we can take. To let you know what Scanlon said about our reserves, he says he likes about 20% of our operating budget. We have 30. And to let you know what the DOR said, when I told them we have perpetually put 5% away, 5% in free cash, they said, quote, "That makes no sense." They do not recommend 5 to 7% as a one size fits all. They recommend a range from 0 to 14%, depending on what your goals are. Our fiscal stability plan was made at a time when we were in the red. Its purpose was to create savings. Our savings are overfilled. The DOR says that every single year, you need to set a new target for your savings and your free cash. If what I am hearing from Director Nardi is that there is an intent to use the free cash and the reserves for all kinds of projects that the public don't know the price tag of at the expense of fully funding our schools, that is not something that this mayor was elected to do, and that is not something that any of you on city council were elected to do. The mayor ran on funding schools. That is what this council is charged with, finding a budget that does. We have to do that. We have about 10 more days left to do it. I am suggesting to you that you should be more engaged as a council in making plans and choosing plans, because your finance director works for the city, works for the people of Northampton. It is her duty to take our feedback and come up with a plan that meets our needs. And our needs are for our children to have educations, for our sidewalks to be traversable by people with disabilities, for our flood pumps to save us from floods. I don't know what other kinds of projects are planned and what kinds of price tags they have. I know that the needs of my people, which people I represent, I stand in their shoes before you today as thousands of people, their voice. This budget does not meet their needs. You have a way forward. You have a map. It's very easy. Operational audits will make you leaner. Picking the priorities of the people will make you leaner. Choosing the targets of your schools will help you build the city that we all want to see. You can do this. You can absolutely do this. You have the expertise. The mayor has the expertise, and the finance director has the expertise. What is missing are the values of the people, and they must be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give Finance Director Nardi a chance to respond.
If the mayor wants to speak first, I'm happy to allow her to do that.
Sure.
Thanks. First, I wanted to say that I've never seen DOR say anything other than you should have policies that are consistent and stick to them. Not that you should change them every year. And I will just say, I asked at the prior meeting what the plan is for 8 months from now when the deficit is even larger. And I and others called this meeting in the hopes of hearing what such a plan would be. Discussions of different budget processes are interesting, and maybe they have merit, but it's not a plan to deal with the very large and growing systemic deficit that we have right now, and deal with it before it erodes our fiscal foundation. And I'll hand it to Charlene.
So yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So our in speaking with Scanlon and Associates, myself, they do recommend that we keep our reserves 20 to 25% of our operating budget. Right now, we have 20, or as of the end of the year for FY 2023, we had $22 million in stabilization, which is 18% of the budget. So we have not hit 20%. We do have financial fiscal policies that we actually redid when I arrived here. It was a project that Susan Wright started, and we worked with the UMass, I'm missing the words. We worked with an outside contractor who helped went through our policies. They were outside financial people who worked in other cities. They were very impressed by our policies and how they work and operate. And I will go back to what we were told during our audit, which is our financial policies have led us to being a financially healthy community. And I do understand there is values here and there are a lot of priorities for the city, but my job also is to warn you when you try to make a budget that is not sustainable over multiple years. And using reserves on a continued basis is not a plan. It just pushes the issue, the structural deficit or shortfall, down further down the years and just makes it larger. So as a financial director, it is my job just to warn you that that is a dangerous place to go.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I want to respect Councilor's time. It's already gone about 15 minutes over. I want to thank Councilor Rothenberg and the panel for the presentation, for the engaging discussion that we've had. And we will take up the budget this Thursday, starting at 6:30 p.m. In council chambers and on Zoom. And I invite folks to come and give public comment. And so thank you all. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Elkins and seconded by Councilor Perry. A roll call, please, Laura, on adjournment.
Councilor Dobbs.
Yes.
Councilor Elkins.
Yes.
Councilor Jarrett.
Yes.
Councilor Clemmer.
Yes.
Councilor Labarge.
Yes.
Councilor Moulton.
Yes.
Councilor Perry.
Yes.
And Councilor Rothenberg.
Thank you all.
I didn't hear your vote, but okay, it was a yes. Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.